Welcome to the People Leaders Podcast, the audio resource for managers and business leaders creating high-performing teams. Join leadership and team development experts Jen and Michelle Turkelson each week as they explore both subjects from every angle. Through practical tips, valuable insights, and compelling interviews with leadership experts around the world, you'll learn how to bring out the best in your staff and how to give your best as a leader.
And we're back for another podcast. How you doing, Michelle?
Very well, very well. I'm loving getting back to our podcast. We've got some feedback from people that they really enjoyed the practical nature of our podcast and want to hear more. So here we are.
Yes, let's get to it. So on this podcast, we're going to do a little bit of a case study on a tool that we have put out, which has become one of our most popular downloadable tools. And that's above the line and below the line, which is an accountability framework that teams can use and also organizations can use as well. And the premise is that there are above the line ways of operating, which are usually constructive and responsive and growth mindset. And then there are below the line ways of thinking and behaving that usually look at blame, victimhood, and not taking accountability and responsibility. So, Michelle, you've been working closely with a team over how many months now with them?
Oh, maybe 4 to 6 months.
4 to 6 months, okay. And can you tell me why you used above the line and below the line?
Yeah. So with working with the team, it became clear that there were some norms within the team that weren't particularly healthy. However, there were some opportunities to introduce some healthy ways of behaving. So instead of, introducing a team charter where we looked at, so what are the types of behaviors or commitments that we could make? And that is such a great tool too. Thought I'd experiment and use above the line and below the line in order to create a set of, team norms that people could, start to experiment with. So instead of a team charter, we used above the line, below the line. And so in a team session, I introduced above the line, below the line, and then broke the team into little subgroups. And they talked about where they can see above the line happening in meetings and what it would look like. What would below the line in meetings look like? What would it look like when we're sending emails if we were operating above the line, below the line? Language, what sort of language would you be hearing from other people if it was above the line? And we just sort of unpacked it that way. And then, again, we always turn it back on ourselves. What is above the line thinking for me? When I've just made a presentation, perhaps it didn't go so well, or I got some sort of corrective feedback, what is above the line thinking that I could adopt in a situation like that, and what is the below the line thinking that I would adopt? And so we really let people go away and unpack it in their own way. And it is a tool that they are using to just sort of flash up at the beginning of a meeting. Yeah, let's remind ourselves about above the line, below the line.
Right. So a couple of questions there. So initially when you said, I asked what problem you were trying to solve, and you said something about some of those behaviours that were creeping in through the team. I think it's really interesting to actually unpack. So what were some of the behaviours that weren't making this team perform as well as they could?
Well, so what's really interesting is that the performance was fantastic, really good feedback, but it was at a cost. And that was that people would work harder. They became a little bit more siloed. There was a bit of direct, command and control because the workload was just so much. That was the feeling perhaps that leadership had. We just got to work harder and longer, and maybe I need to be directive, or you need to go away and solve the problem. Those sorts of behaviours were creeping in.
I know, it's interesting, isn't it? Like when you've got that bit of a hierarchy where you've got senior leaders who usually know more, get paid more, and have more freedom, they're usually more engaged in the process and then expect everyone else to be just as engaged, where we kind of like just have to be really contextual about our expectations of people who are in a team as well. All right, so you're trying to solve the problem of creating some behavioural norms that everyone can live with. Now, when you started to unpack it, Michelle, how did you know what items to really start defining, such as you said, meetings, email, communication?
Yeah, so they were just ideas that we have worked with, Jen, that we know are sticking points for teams. Like, where do they spend most of their times? In meetings, and it's either team meetings or they're presenting to stakeholders or they're problem-solving meetings. But yeah, there's a lot of time in meetings, and so it just became clear. And I asked the team, like, what else could we do above the line, below the line? So what happened is that each of the team. So then we did above the line, below the line as it relates to our behavioural norms, and people then started introducing it, as a self-reflection tool, and then as a sort of prelude to a meeting. Let's have a look at how we want to, conduct ourselves throughout this meeting, and then do a bit of a recap at the end. How do you reckon we went with above the line, below the line? Then the team sort of broke up into groups, and one team had a fantastic idea, and one of the issues in the team was respect. And so what they did is they created an above the line, below the line as it specifically relates to respect. So if we were to show respect to ourselves and to one another, what does above the line look like for that? If we were disrespectful, or the opposite of showing and being respectful, what does that look like? And so they did an above the line, below the line, just as it relates to this issue of respect, and did a fantastic job. And what they did is that they made it very relevant to their team. So they put some of the phrases that they've heard people say below the line in this is what below the line looks like. When you do this or say this, this is below the line. And then some of the phrases, and one was, I won't share what the actual phrase was because, I want to keep confidentiality, but it was almost like a high five type phrase that they use, when things have gone really well or they've hit a benchmark. So it was those sorts of things, and encouraging statements, how can I help you get that done, blah, 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 or let's muck in and do this together. It's those sorts of things that they use that were very real for that team, that any other team would look at and go, oh, yeah, it doesn't have a lot of meaning. But for this team, they made it their own. They did a fantastic job.
Right. So that was one of the areas that you really, the team unpacked, was this notion of respect. What was some of the other themes that came out that were really important for this particular team?
Yeah, well, it's funny, Jan, because a lot of teams are going through very similar ones. And one that came up was psychological safety, working with a few teams now that is coming up again and again and again. And when, from a team point of view, from an organisational point of view, that was one. Well-being and resilience was another key theme. And yeah, and how we have our meetings. So meetings, that broad area of meetings became another key theme for the team.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that you said that at the beginning of the meeting, you're reminding people how we want to be, right? And for some, that could be tedious. It's like, oh, do we have to do this again? However, what you're demonstrating is that this is important. Like, you're putting, 2 minutes, 3 minutes on the agenda at the beginning and the end to check. Because remember, if you want to create a habit or a change, you actually have to act as if. And so acting as if is reminding ourselves, who do we need to be in this meeting? And then giving ourselves feedback. So how do you think we went from 1 to 5 as far as how, effective we were in this meeting? And, it's a big way.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a phrase that you use, and I've started to use it, baking it into the system. And so often we think that our work in teams is about getting this task done or delivering this project. And it's it's the how. We can't do it alone. We need to do it with people. And that's why this team development aspect, the people, the relationship side of things is as important as the task. Because what I have seen over 20 years is when you focus on just the task and forget about the people and the relationship, it will show. It will come out that it's not working over time unless you're extremely lucky but you need to invest time, energy, effort and resources into the team development side of things, such as above the line, below the line before we have a team meeting and just checking in and getting feedback and those sorts of things. The other area, Jan, was feedback for this team. Let's have a look at how we give and receive feedback.
Okay. So a couple of things about that, and then I want to get back into feedback. You mentioned, psychological safety was really important and you have to bake it into the system. And what the research shows that any training in psychological safety does not work unless processes and systems support it. So, for example, if you want to bake in psychological safety into a process or a system, you do it in your one-on-ones by having check-ins. You do it in your meetings by being inclusive and asking everyone to feedback and making sure that people have an opportunity to share insights, whereas assuming just the loud people or the people who don't have to be invited to say something have an opportunity to. So there's some of the things I think are important to know.
And Jen, I think psychological safety goes to hierarchy sometimes. And as a leader, you are a role model, you leave that leadership shadow wherever you go. So it really is incumbent on the leader to create that environment of psychological safety. It's really, really important that they lead the way. And how do they do that? And it's things like, can you admit a mistake in front of your team? Can you actually say to them things like, it's been pretty, challenging time for me and this is why. And it's not all the time, but it's be real. Let them know that you are not this robot that can, do it all and you're impervious, to pain and setbacks and those sorts of things. They want to know that you're real. And so as a leader, and so how do you bake that into a system? You schedule that in. Have I shared my thoughts, my feelings, my setbacks, my whatever with the team this week? Whether it's on a weekly, maybe it's not a weekly, it's every fortnight or once a month, but that's how you would bake that into a system if you're a leader, for example.
Yeah. And again, we're looking at teams who are solely in teams for long periods. If you are in teams like project teams that you're in and out, some of these will definitely be advantageous, and then some of them may not be appropriate. However, we have seen project teams use above the line, below the line as their number one tool for the relationship part. Because when you get the relationship right at the beginning of the project, you know actually how to ask for feedback, how to set up, the strengths and weaknesses of people, etc. So let's get back to feedback. So one of the issues that the team said that was important to them was feedback. And so how did they use it for above the line, below the line?
Well, it was, what does above the line look like for giving feedback? What does above the line look like for receiving feedback? Because they're two different parts of the same process, aren't they? And then equally, what does it look like when you're operating below the line, when you're giving feedback, for example, or when you have received feedback? So maybe below the line, giving feedback was, giving somebody feedback, but it's unsolicited and not asking for permission first, they didn't even ask you. So, I mean, that was one that they wanted to start exploring. And above the line was in terms of thinking about feedback, it's actually asking for feedback. And that's a whole cultural change for all teams and all organisations, moving and shifting to this notion of asking for feedback instead of waiting or expecting your manager to give it to you or somebody else to give it to you. High achievers ask for feedback.
And ask for specific feedback as opposed to, instead of how am I going, can you give me some feedback about how I approached that presentation or the quality of my report. You know, the more specific, the better it is for someone to actually give you quality feedback. All right, so you introduce the model, you then define success, what it looks like in different areas, and then they've come back with feedback was important, psychological safety, meetings, etc. And then each cohort within the team, I suppose, came up with what is above the line, below the line in each of these areas, right? So they've got the what. So now how do we actually use it to hold each other to account or above the line? So what have you done now?
Yeah, we're not there. We're not there yet in terms of giving each other feedback. Where I have started is getting feedback, asking them for feedback from me and the managers. Like, can you give some feedback? And I'm being really specific. So I wanted to lead the way on that, and and let them know that it's really useful. And so all the feedback that they give me, I package it up and share it back to them, and then do something about it. So that every 6 weeks, asking for feedback, and then reminding them, you gave me this feedback. We've introduced this as a result. Thank you. See how we're sort of making the changes.
Can you give us an example of that?
I can, but I do. So yes, I definitely can. And so one of them. So this particular team actually has very detail-oriented people who like structure and process, and so I presented an overall plan of what we were doing, and then some of them thought there wasn't enough clarity there. Right. And so, I went away, and fair enough too, because I've been doing this for so long, and I know what has to happen next and whatever, but and that's great because they're engaged. They want to know the detail, and because I'm not particularly enamored with the detail of what next and the next week and the next week and the next week and what we're going to do. That was the feedback that I got from some people, and as a result, I put together a detailed plan, which is good, great. Yeah. Had everything that was up here anyway on paper. So I thank them for that. It was great.
Yeah, because I remember when you started working with them, the first thing you did is gather data, from the senior leader and then the senior leaders and then from the team, and then you did individual information because...
we do. Well, I do that a lot. And so, there are a couple of teams that I'm working with at the moment that have had similar, we had a similar approach. Get one-on-one feedback from each individual in the team. We have a set of questions that we ask, and we always ask everybody in the team the same question. And then at the end of these projects that I'm working with on these teams, I'll ask the same questions. And whilst it's good to do like a survey with questions and ratings, there is something more that comes out when you do some qualitative ask questions face to face or over the phone. You get a richness that comes with that, and it feels like it's very time consuming, but it's so worth it. Got some really good feedback from the teams that I'm working with having used that approach.
Right. Okay, so where you are at the moment is that you have created that framework around those individual items that were really causing a lot of those behavioural issues with them. And so what is the next stage then for you and the team? So you've asked for feedback, you've got a plan. What would be the next step?
Yeah. So the next step really is weaning them off me in a sense. And it's not that they're dependent on me at all. I just facilitate discussions. And so increasingly I'm getting people to volunteer or reaching out to them and say, oh, can you run this session? Because what we do, the way that we've baked it into the session is that we have a team session every, whatever it is, for one team at the moment. We're doing it every couple of weeks, and then for another team we're doing it every week. So it's different for different teams. So I'm sort of mixing up a couple of teams that I'm working with because I'm really conscious about confidentiality. And so really it's about weaning them off the reliance on me as a facilitator and I will leave them with the plan. And it won't be my plan, it will be their plan. How do we keep this alive? What are some of the things that are working really well that we could and should continue? How do we make sure that we stay on track? What are some of the, systems or processes that we really need to embed before I sort of step out of this role? And so we're doing that together. It's like we're transitioning together. We've got a plan and a workshop organised for us to do that.
Because a question that's going around in my head is it's easy to look at what's working and what's not working, but then how do we actually hold each other to account? And this is part of that conversation around, like you said, baking it into the system by continuously asking for feedback, checking in during meetings, maybe one-on-ones, and also having phrases. So it's as a team or a collective. So an example that the team that I've been working with using above the line and below the line as I suppose it's kind of like their compass, like everything's coming back to, was that above the line when we're looking for feedback? And one of the things that they had an issue with was decisions. So what would happen is in a team, they would make a decision and then go away, and then the senior people in that team would then change it, and then other people would be on the end of that and go, what? Like, what just happened? Are we important or not? So that was an issue that came up above the line, below the line. So what we did is that we fleshed out what that looked like, what would good look like, and then we came up with a system where anyone who had to make a decision and put it at the table, before anyone agreed, everyone on the table had to go around and ask a question about that particular issue or problem. So that's inclusivity. It's making sure that we understand the context and the issue, and then become solution focused. And since doing that as a process, the quality of decisions, the acceptance, because in human synergistic, they have quality and acceptance. They're the two ends or sides of a problem. So you could have a quality decision. So, you've got, it's logical, it makes sense, financial, all that kind of stuff. But if you don't have anyone accepting it, it ain't going to do anything. So you need both of them. And so that was one of the ways that we held each other to account by asking those questions. And then part of it was that if it did happen, we need to have a conversation with that. Like, it's not rocket science. It's like, can we have a conversation around that behaviour? Because it actually seemed like it was a bit below the line. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. And I really love the idea of that as a process, like, in a decision-making forum, before the decision is made, we go around and ask questions, because what you're doing is you are building skill in questioning. What a great skill for anybody and everybody to do, because you can then start to, reflect and go, wow, that was a really good question. Actually, that's a question that I could use in my little toolkit, or I keep asking the same question. I'm all about the when, I'm all about the, or I'm about the why.
Yeah, because you get to understand how people think. And especially with people with that preference for introversion, we don't necessarily get to understand their process, whereas extroverts, we're hearing it all the time. And I think, that was a good process to hold people above the line around decision making. All right. So is there anything else that you want to share with us about that team or the framework that you did?
All I would, so I'm thinking about a couple of teams that I'm working with now, and using above the line and below the line, whether they're going through, major change, trying to decide how they work in a hybrid environment. What I love about introducing above the line, below the line is that people just get it, Jen. Like, it is not like, what we say, rocket surgery. It's not a difficult concept to get. And you can, once you introduce it, all I would say is have a go, because people get it. Teams get it. They understand the concept of it. And so all I would say is, each of the teams that I've introduced it to have got it early and are starting to run with it. And you can just see that it's a really good model to use for so many situations.
Yeah. So 3 things that you could do. First of all is print it off A3 and then put it up on the wall. And we've seen organisations put it up in the tea room just to kind of like have a point, right?
Yep.
The second thing that you could do is introduce it at a meeting as a template and just tell me what you think about this. You know, what are your first impressions? Or if we were to use this, how do you think we would go about it? So engage people, you know, early on. Because people are smart. They know.
Yeah, people are smart. And so there's a little engineering company that I'm working with at the moment, and there's this ongoing issue about people leaving their dirty dishes in the sink. Like, they do get a cleaner in, but it's not every day sort of thing. So really, you've got to look after yourself. So I am introducing above the line and below the line as it relates to the kitchen. And how we operate, because there are people who are engineers, there are people who are mechanics, there are electricians, there's all manner of different professional types, truck drivers, you name it. And so I'm going to introduce above the line, below the line as it relates to the kitchen tea room area that they call it, and I'll keep you posted on that.
Okay. So what would you do? Just give us an idea of what you would do.
I'm going to start with a piece of butcher's paper really, and put above the line, below the line, and leave a pen dangling. And so above the line is put your dishes away. You know, below the line is, dirty plates left on the table. You know what I mean? And then I'll have a bit of a scorecard. So how are you operating, you know, today, above the line, below the line? So just have a bit of fun with it, because they're most of them are males, and a great crew. And I think they'll really go with that in a fun way.
Fun. That's right.
Yeah.
Because like even below the line is like one fork doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Things like that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I need to do that at home.
Yeah.
My bugbear at home is a wet chucks left in the sink.
In the sink.
You know, no deal. Yeah, that was my thing.
Well, I mean, what I would say to that is that at least it's been used, Jen. You know what I mean?
Yes, thank you. All right, I needed that. All right, thank you everyone for listening. If you've got any feedback around any particular topic you would like us to deep dive, because we have an opportunity to work with so many teams across different industries, you know, we've got lots of stories and practical solutions for you. So I hope you've got something out of this. All right, until next time. Ciao.
Wow.
Thank you for joining us on the People Leaders Podcast. For show notes and other resources, please visit us at peopleleaderspodcast.com. If you have a leadership or management question or subject you'd like covered on the podcast, please contact us at podcast@peopleleaders.com.au. The People Leaders Podcast is brought to you by the Experts On Air Podcast Network.